How much of the past tense can you really understand? Let's find out. I'm going to share a conversation with you, and I'll gradually increase the difficulty by using more and more different past tenses as we go along. Ready for the challenge? Hello there, I'm Claire. Today we're going to see just how much of the past tense in English you can understand through a conversation about a recent trip to Barcelona. I will be asked some questions and I will answer them, and as I talk I will increase the difficulty level of the tenses little by little. We will move through the different CEFR levels of English. So we'll start with A1 to A2 levels. This is perfect for beginners to pre-intermediate learners. Then we'll step it up to B1 and B2 levels, suitable for intermediate to upper intermediate learners. And then finally, we'll reach C1 to C2 levels, designed for advanced to proficient English speakers. This is a guide for when you would typically learn these tenses. You'll notice that as the answers get more advanced, we will continue to use the tenses from previous levels. We will increase the vocabulary difficulty as we answer the questions too. I've also worked hard to create a free PDF of today's questions and answers for you all. If you'd like to learn more about the past tenses that I use and see the grammar that I use, you can download the free PDF in the link in the description. If you don't have time, don't worry, you don't have to download the free PDF right now, because the questions and answers will also appear on the screen next to me as I hear and say them. Are you ready? Let's go and test your skills. A1 level.
What did you do last weekend?
Last weekend, I went to Barcelona. I saw many famous places. I was very excited.
What did you do when you arrived?
When I arrived, I went to my hotel. Then I walked to Sagrada Familia. I took photos. After that, I spoke to an old woman selling pastries in a bakery, and I asked for one. It was delicious. She was nice to me.
How long did you stay there?
I stayed there for 3 days. On day 2, I visited Park Güell. I bought a small souvenir. On day 3, I walked on La Rambla Street. I heard music and saw street artists. I felt very happy. Barcelona was beautiful. I had a great time. A2 level.
What was the most memorable part of your trip?
The most memorable part was when I was walking through Park Güell. I saw a musician playing Spanish guitar. While I was listening, the sun was going down and the whole park looked perfect. I felt like I was in a dream.
While you were exploring, what was the weather like?
While I was exploring the city, the weather was sunny and warm. But one afternoon, it started raining lightly while I was visiting Sagrada Familia. I bought an umbrella from a street vendor and continued my tour.
What were you doing the day before you left for Barcelona?
The day before I left, I was getting organized. I was checking my suitcase and making sure I had my tickets. My friend helped me to get organized, and I was so pleased she was there to help me. Later, I watched a YouTube video about things I could do when I arrived in Barcelona. I was feeling so excited. B1 level.
Had you visited any other cities in Spain before you went to Barcelona?
Yes, I had visited Madrid a few years earlier. I had not been there before, So I explored the Prado Museum and tried traditional churros con chocolate. But Barcelona felt different because of the sea and Gaudi's architecture. Before my trip, I hadn't been to northern Spain, so this was my first time.
Had you prepared a list of places to visit, or were you traveling around spontaneously?
I had prepared a list. I had written down all the famous spots, like Sagrada Familia and La Boqueria Market. But while I was traveling around, I realized the city was more crowded than I had expected. So one morning, I decided to skip my plans. Instead, I ended up wandering the Gothic Quarter, where I found a tiny flamenco bar. It was perfect. Locals were clapping and a guitarist had just started playing. Sometimes the best moments aren't on any list. B2 level.
Before your trip, how long had you been considering visiting Barcelona? And what finally made you decide to go?
I had been thinking about visiting Barcelona for nearly 2 years, but I hadn't committed because I would prioritize work trips. Then, last winter, a friend mentioned she had been learning Spanish and kept sending me photos of Gaudi's architecture around the city. By March, I realized I had been saving money for years without a clear goal, so I booked the flights impulsively. Turns out doing things in the moment suits me.
While exploring the Gothic Quarter, you mentioned a flamenco bar. Had you been expecting to find such authentic spots, or were they a surprise?
Honestly, I hadn't been expecting it at all. Before Barcelona, I used to assume local tours were the only way to discover authentic places. But that day, while I was wandering, I heard music echoing from a doorway. The owner later told me locals would gather there every Sunday for decades. But recently, many traditions had been changing. It felt like stumbling into a secret world that had been hiding in plain sight.
You talked about the old woman with the pastry. Had you ever interacted with locals like that in previous travels, or was this a new experience?
Years ago, I would rarely approach strangers abroad. I used to stick to my guidebook. But in Barcelona, something changed. Maybe because I had been studying basic Spanish for months, I felt braver. When the woman spoke to me, even though I hadn't fully understood her, her warmth and friendly attitude made me realize how much I had been missing by staying in my comfort zone. Now I try to talk to locals everywhere. C1 level.
If you had more time, what would you have done?
Had I had an extra week, I would have ventured beyond the area of Montserrat. Locals had been urging me to hike its trails, which I had heard had been carved by centuries of pilgrims going to the area. I might have lingered longer in Gracia too. Its alleyways had hinted at more places I could have sought out, but I hadn't fully looked into. But more than anything, I would have gone to that flamenco bar again. By the time I left, I think I had begun realizing how rare it is to witness traditions that haven't been diluted by time.
Reflecting on your interactions, how had your preconceptions about Barcelona been shifting before actually visiting the city?
Prior to the trip, I had been harboring this image of Barcelona as a postcard perfect tourist hub, all crowded beaches and Instagrammable landmarks. But even before I hit the ground, subtle shifts had been occurring. While I had been researching, I stumbled on forums describing the city's dual soul, where modernity and tradition collided. Walking through El Born the first evening, I was struck by how old-fashioned stores had stood defiantly beside chic galleries and would continue to stand beside them regardless of what changes came to the city. C2 level.
If you had been more familiar with the local culture before your trip, do you think you would have enjoyed your experience in Barcelona even more? Why or why not?
Honestly, had I not been so preoccupied with meticulously executing my itinerary, each museum, meal, and landmark slotted into a rigid schedule, I might have recognized sooner how my self imposed schedule had been stifling the very spontaneity that breathes life into travel. While I had been methodically ticking off my must see sites, I'd overlooked so many other sights and wonders. Later, reviewing photos of monuments I'd half absorbed, I realised I'd failed to linger anywhere long enough to feel a place's pulse. Too busy chasing the next check mark on my list. Had I not over prepared on pre trip study, I might have altered the journey from a checklist of tourist encounters to a celebration of the beauty of uncharted moments and locations. True holidays, I came to see, lie not in visiting everything important in a place, but in balancing relaxation with curiosity, knowing enough to listen deeply, yet leaving room for the unexpected to rewrite your plans. Wow, if you're still here, well done. I would love to hear about a trip you took that was memorable. Try using the tenses from today too. Don't forget that English past tenses are introduced gradually as learners develop a stronger grasp of grammar and sentence structure. Each past tense has different functions, and their complexity depends on verb forms, sentence constructions, and usage in context. So don't worry if you did not understand it all. It takes time and a lot of practice. Remember, you can download the conversation from today in order to examine the grammar that goes into making these tenses. The link is in the description. Thank you so much for watching today's video, and don't forget to subscribe to see the next one. See you soon!